This episode is sponsored by Raycon Wireless Earbuds. What is up, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, and today we are talking Mulan, specifically the live-action remake that premiered on Disney Plus last week. Now, like many of you, I have mixed feelings about all the remakes Disney has put out over the past few years. I mean, most of the feelings being mixed are pure hatred and utter disappointment, but still, whenever Disney announces that they're once again going to try and recapture the magic that one of their animated masterpieces generated, I bury my feelings of anger and resentment as deep as I possibly can and try to go into it with an open mind. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work, and I sometimes end up wishing these soulless abominations would go back to the fiery pits of hell where they belong. Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and the god-awful Maleficent movies, to name a few, but I'm happy to report that that wasn't totally the case with Mulan. This one felt like more than Disney just making a pathetic attempt to improve on the already beloved. There's no shot-for-shot remakes like in Beauty and the Beast, and no changes in the timeline to fix a tiny little chronology plot hole that apparently really hurt their feelings when audiences joked about it. For once, it feels like they went into it thinking, okay, we're remaking a movie that we know people are emotionally attached to, let's pay it the respect it deserves, but also tell a story of our own. Now, whether or not you, the audience, enjoys that story is a matter of opinion. I have my own thoughts, obviously, but I'm looking at it through a very nuanced lens, the messed up origins lens. When I watch these remakes, I'm not only comparing them to their animated originals, but the many versions that came before. And with Mulan in particular, I found that was a pretty good lens to use because it seems to have taken just as much inspiration from the Disney film as it does from the almost 2,000-year-old poem it's based on. So in addition to just giving you my opinions on the movie, I also want to break down its numerous connections to the stories that preceded it. Unfortunately, that does mean I'm going to be spoiling it though, so before we dive into the breakdown, let me just answer the one question that many of the people watching this have: should you buy Mulan now or just wait until it's free on Disney Plus? Well, honestly, that depends on who you are. If you're a fan of the original and looking for a way to make quarantine life just a little more exciting, I would recommend it. The movie's fun, it's exciting, it's got some weird humor sprinkled throughout that you can either make fun of together or blow air out your nose at. It's also kid-friendly, of course, so it's a great choice if you're watching it with the family. That being said, when it comes to kids' movies, it does push the envelope in ways that makes it easier for adults like me to sit through. I don't want to spoil anything in this section, so all I'm going to say is catapults, and those who've seen the movie should know what I'm talking about. To be completely transparent though, I think that if you are going to get the family or the homies together for a movie night, there's way better options out there. Hell, there's better options on Disney Plus that you don't have to pay $30 for. Not saying I have a problem with that price tag, by the way. I do want to support the people involved in the movie's production, and if I were to see it in a theater, I'd be paying close to that much anyway and only able to watch it once. Also, in that case, I'd probably have some ugly kid sitting behind me crying to his mother who evidently has selective hearing. When you pay the price on Disney Plus though, you're in the comfort of your own home, you can pause, rewind, watch it more than once if you want to, and you can share it with anyone who has a profile on your account. There's also something to be said about watching a new movie at home. Lauren and I have had more movie nights since all this chaos started than I think I have in the past 5 years combined, but most of those movies have been out for a while. So this time around, something just felt different and exciting about watching a blockbuster film that was just revealed to the world. I don't know, it made me forget that everything was on fire for a second. So yeah, those are my thoughts on whether or not you should buy it. If you're feeling curious, yay. If not, nay. Now, on to the breakdown. Final warning, Solo fam, there are spoilers beyond this point. If you haven't seen the movie yet and choose to watch this anyway, the responsibility for the spoiling falls on your shoulders. I've already talked about it with your mother, and we agree that if you ruin it for yourself and complain to me about it, no Christmas this year. Yeah, that's all it takes in this house. Anyway, let's talk about the new Mulan's plot, because this was an interesting one. Because while all of the live-action remakes so far have been for Disney's movies that are based on classic fables and myths, the original Mulan tale is a bit different. Now, for those unaware, the first Mulan story was actually a 360-word poem written roughly around 400 to 500 AD during the Northern Wei dynasty. It's called The Ballad of Mulan, and like the movie you know and love, it follows a young girl who takes her father's place in the Imperial Army, goes to war against barbarians, and proves herself to be one of the most exceptional soldiers on the battlefield. But here's the thing, a 360-word poem being stretched into a 90-minute movie means there's a lot of room for creativity. As a result, the numerous films, plays, movies and TV shows that it inspired throughout the centuries took unique shapes of their own. And that is what intrigued me about this movie. I knew they were adapting Mulan, but I was curious to see how much of it was going to be Disney's Mulan and how much would be from the original poem. Were they going to pull a Beauty and the Beast and try and reenact every scene verbatim while ignoring the source material entirely? Or do what the other artists inspired by Mulan's legend did and reimagine the story for a new audience in a new era? Well, I've got to say, I'm actually kind of impressed at how well they were able to do both. I caught some obscure references that only people familiar with the Ballad of Mulan and the other story we talked about when I revisited the movie's origins back in March, the Sui Tang romance, would have noticed. And actually, I think the best way for me to point out all these cool little details would be to just explain what happens in Mulan 2020, so that's what I'm gonna do. So for starters, this story takes place in a universe where the ancient Chinese concept of Qi is basically the Force from Star Wars. Characters can harness it to do amazing physical feats like launch a spear into the air and kick it at their opponent. Only unlike the Force, one doesn't necessarily have to be trained in how to use their Qi. Mulan was apparently born incredibly Force sensitive, I mean with a lot of Qi, and on one occasion even uses it to save herself from falling off a roof and probably dying. No lie, that scene happens 3 minutes into the movie and my gut reaction was to pause it and bury my head in my hands. I understand what they were going for, trying to show how gifted Mulan is at such a young age, but this felt like some Dora the Explorer shit to me. After the opening credits, we skip ahead about a decade to the main conflict in the story. The Rorans, led by a savage named Bori Khan, are pillaging villages all throughout the Chinese Empire. You may already notice the difference with the animated film's antagonists, the Huns, led by Shan Yu, who was inspired by Attila the Hun. Well, for those curious, the Rorans were an actual nomadic tribe that was in conflict with the Northern Wei dynasty. And while the Ballad of Mulan never clarifies who she's going to war with, due to the time period it was written in, most experts believe it was the Rorans. Matter of fact, the Rorans are the antagonists in the vast majority of the movies and otherwise inspired by Mulan's poem. The animated film is one of the few exceptions, and that's because the Huns were more recognizable to American audiences. There's another interesting point we should touch on though, and that's the witch character. She's the one who helps Bori Khan slaughter innocents and deceive the Emperor on more than one occasion to give the Rorans the strategic advantage. She also turns into a falcon sometimes. At first glance, you might be wondering, who is this crazy bitch? Why'd they decide to make Shan Yu's mostly irrelevant pet a major player in this story? In fact, why does Disney insist on doing that with every antagonist in every live-action remake they force on us? Well, sadly, I can't answer that second question, though it probably has something to do with selling more Funko Pops. However, the addition of the witch character may not be as random as you thought, because the witch's real name is actually Xian Lang, which is no doubt a reference to Princess Xian Yang, a character in the Sui Tang romance story I mentioned earlier. In both the story and the movie, the character starts off as Mulan's enemy, but they end up bonding over the fact that they're both female warriors and go on to assist each other. I will say that in the end of the movie, the witch character ends up being a pretty big disappointment and feeling very underutilized, but maybe that's just me. Now, like in every iteration of the story, the Emperor sends out official orders that one man in every family must join the Imperial Army, but Mulan ends up subbing in for her dad, who's already done his fair share of fighting and is in no shape to do any more. Only a big difference this one has with the cartoon classic is that instead of being followed into battle by her family's dragon spirit, she's followed by a phoenix. Sadly, that means we lose all the fun and humor that Mushu gave us in the last movie, but to make up for it, we have this shot of Mulan with wings, so totally worth it, right? You can pretty much assume what Mulan's experience at camp is like. It's very similar to the animated film, but with significantly less likable characters. The only ones whose presence I appreciated were Cricket, who yes, is supposed to be a reference to the Lucky Cricket, and Hong Wei, Mulan's sort of love interest, but Disney didn't tug on that thread too hard because they're all about strong, independent women now. Anyway, our heroine goes on to show how talented of a warrior she is right from the get-go, unlike the animated version where she blows at absolutely everything. This is another detail that's borrowed from the poem, only in that version she's skilled because she was trained by her father, not because she's magic. While everyone in the army is impressed by her, the commander even wants her to marry his daughter when the war is over, a plot point that's been used throughout many a Mulan tales, and things are looking pretty good until the first battle. As opposed to the 1998 Mulan, where her identity is revealed due to an injury, and the poem where her comrades don't find out until they visit her after the war, Mulan gets inspired by her 1v1 with the witch and throws off her armor in what might be the most femme-powering moment in all of cinema history. I'm kidding, of course. I thought this was a super lame way of going about the transformation, and they made the scene so damn dramatic. And look at Mulan's hair. Is she in a Garnier Fructis commercial? How in the hell did she get that amount of volume and shine when she's been bathing in a lake and wearing a helmet for 2 months? Girl power. That's how. We also get to see a live-action version of the avalanche that killed the Huns in the last movie, only this one is triggered by a catapult. And after that is when everybody figures out that their comrade, Hua Jun, is actually a girl named Hua Mulan. Note, by the way, that her family name is Hua and not Fa like in the cartoon. The character's actually been given a multitude of surnames over the years, including Wei and Zhu, but Hua is the most common. Personally, I thought this reveal was kind of lame too. I appreciate the writer's attempts at trying something new, but this just didn't hit the same chord as the animated versions at all. Because in that one, Mulan is in a much more pitiful state when it happens. She almost died while saving all of her comrades single-handedly, but because of the injury she got from saving them, they figure out she's a girl, and that is all they care about. She's barely dressed, she can hardly stand up, she's begging for forgiveness, and the person she trusted most to support his allies literally turns his back on her, leaving her to die, or maybe even worse. But in Mulan 2020, we don't get any of that. Our hero is perfectly fine and just kicked a ton of Roran ass, but when the dust settles, they see her luscious locks and...
He's a girl?
I mean, they do put more emphasis on the whole dishonor to your family thing, and I realize that's significant in their culture, but she's supposed to be a fallen hero at this point, and I'm just not getting that. You know what though? This started as the origins part of the video, but it's slowly transforming into the review part, so let's just skip ahead to the review. Gunther is getting real sick of me filming and is insisting that he sit on my lap for this part, so if you hear any snorting or heavy breathing into the microphone in this section, it's him, not me. Don't tell them it's actually me. So in case you haven't figured it out yet, I'm pretty indifferent about this movie, at least when it comes to the story. I appreciate their attempt at continuing the tradition that other artists have set and reimagining a new Mulan story for a new generation, but this one just fell so flat. And not just as a remake, mind you, but as a standalone movie. And as I mentally sift through all the things I don't like about it, the common denominator in the majority of them is their decision to include magic. I realized there was a little bit in the cartoon with Mushu being summoned and the Fa family spirits, but that was all pretty low-key. In the new one, it's a huge part of the plot, and the main reason why I feel like we don't see much growth in Mulan's character by the end. I mean, we're literally seeing her do the impossible within the first 3 minutes of the movie, and as a 9-year-old. Then during the matchmaker scene, she does some more crazy shit, and that's after repressing her powers for 10 years. When we see what she's capable of before the adventure even starts, it doesn't leave much room for development. Tell me, how good would The Matrix have been if it started with Neo entering bullet time on his way into kindergarten? I feel like from the very beginning, Mulan could do anything. She had no growing to do whatsoever. It was all of the characters around her that had to change, and we were just waiting for that to happen. And listen, I get the message they were trying to convey, and I have no problem with it. I just think it would have been more potent had we seen Mulan rise to the occasion. Instead, she just continued doing what we already knew she could do because of the magic. So we've got a main character that we're not really invested in. Meanwhile, she's surrounded by side characters who are unlikable by design. And I'm not just saying that, because they're supposed to represent how misogynistic and straight up gross young dudes can be.
I don't care what she looks like.
I agree.
I care what she cooks like.
By the way, that's the scene we get in place of the Girl Worth Fighting For song. I somehow haven't mentioned this yet, but there's only instrumental music, so your favorite ballads are nowhere to be found. I will say they find some interesting ways to incorporate the melodies you're familiar with, or at least reference them.
We're going to make men out of every single one of you.
But yeah, the scenes we got as a replacement for those songs really make you miss the songs. Boomeranging back to my original point about the characters though, the only likable soldier in the whole regiment is the sort of love interest Hong Wei, and Mulan spends most of the movie being a dick to him. I will say they made the Emperor pretty cool though. The one from the animated version is definitely still my favorite.
You don't meet a girl like that every dynasty.
But I like how in the new one, he's a warrior too. Real talk though, Solo fam, we can all agree this guy is ultra reasonable and definitely a forward thinker, right? Well, in both movies, Mulan's dad has a legendary reputation. Don't you think that if the Emperor saw what kind of physical shape he was in and knew he didn't have a son, he would have just let him stay home? It's not about that, John, it's about honor. It was his duty to be on the battlefield. All right, moving on. Hi. What's up? I'm bitching a lot about the story choices, but trust me, there's other things I didn't like about this movie too. Specifically, how cheap it all felt. The CGI looked really fake in some scenes. There were times where it was super obvious they were on a set and not shooting on location. The editors also seemed to have some odd taste with their use of lighting, blur, and saturation. Not to mention that I'm watching a story I've read and seen unfold 100 times at this point, and that I know was just made as a soulless cash grab like the rest of the live action movies. All of those little imperfections combined really just took me out of the experience. But hey, I don't want to end this on a negative note, so let's talk about my favorite Easter egg in the whole movie. It happens toward the beginning. Mulan is riding her horse through a field when she sees some hares running next to her, and when she gets home, she says something about it to her family.
Black Queen and I rode alongside, 2 rabbits running side by side. I think one was a male, one was a female. But you know, you can't really tell when they're running that fast.
It definitely sounds like the ramblings of an insane person, but it's actually the final line of the Ballad of Mulan poem, and kind of sums up the story's message. The he-hare's feet go hop and skip. The she-hare's eyes are muddled and fuddled. 2 hares running side by side close to the ground, how can they tell if I am he or she? Pretty cool, right? Admittedly, it's kind of an awkward time to just wedge it in there, but I appreciate the reference. Little details like that are what kept me tuned in during the movie's low points. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the new Mulan. Honestly, I feel like the deeper I got into this review, the more I realized how much I didn't like it, but I still would recommend it to the people who are genuinely curious. After all, I'm kind of a weirdo. The things that I don't like about it may not bother you at all. Speaking of, I'm gonna pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. If you've seen it, what do you think? If not, why are you waiting? And while you're answering that, I'll tell you about this week's sponsor, Raycon. Now, whether you're a fan of the new Mulan or not, we can all agree that it would have been way better if they included the music from the animated film. But the good news is those sweet jams are not gone forever. You can still listen to them on your favorite streaming services or even a CD if you're a cave person. If you really want to do the soundtrack justice though, you'll listen to it on a pair of Raycon Everyday E25s. The most affordable wireless earbuds on the market that give you the high quality sound you're looking for without breaking your bank. They have 6 hours of playtime on a single charge, with their carrying case storing up to 4 full charges on its own. The Bluetooth pairing is seamless, and they have more bass than you'll know what to do with. What I really love about the E25s is their compact design. Not only does it give you a noise isolating fit that allows you to get in the zone when you're studying or working out, but the lack of dangling wires and stems makes them feel so much more secure in your ears. Not to mention they also come in a ton of dope colors, so you can pick the ones that really match your style and personality. And get this, Raycons are already half the price of other premium brands, but the deal gets even sweeter when you go to buyraycon.com/solo, because you'll get an additional 15% off. Between that price and the free 45-day return policy, you don't have much to lose by trying them. Again, just go to buyraycon.com/solo to get yourself a pair for 15% off. Solo fam, I'm sad to say it's time for us to part ways, but I have good news. This doesn't have to be goodbye. It could be see you later. All you have to do is hit that like button so YouTube knows you enjoy my content. We'll feed even more of it to you through your recommendation feed, and subscribe to have new videos like this in your sub box every week. If that's not enough though, feel free to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram too. They're a great way to stay updated on what I'm doing between videos and to get notified whenever I post, because YouTube's system is broken half the time. Then if you want to balance out the wretchedness I bring to your timeline, make sure to follow my dumpling of a son, Gunther Bernard. The vet says he's skinny for a pug, but you would never guess it. I'll be seeing you beautiful people again next Friday when I post even more messed up content. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.